Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Data Dispatch. We made it to the weekend. I hope you guys have all had a wonderful week, have a good relaxing weekend, and let's talk about a Palantir Technologies earnings preview. And that's because there's only one more trading session before Palantir releases their Q3 earnings. This is going to be the day before the U.S. presidential election. Talking in terms of volatility here, we have some very important things to break down, especially talking about Palantir's current price action, what's happening in the broader market right now. We have some interesting reactions to the actual macroeconomic pieces of data that's came out. For example, the jobs report was highly missed, and the market just shrugged it off. We actually see a rebound in the market today. So very interesting things going on. We're going to be talking about a Morningstar article and some other types of articles that are anticipating, predicting on what Palantir's earnings could possibly bring us in terms of results versus reactions. So if you're a newer returning viewer, hit that like button. We are growing very quickly in terms of subscribers. Hit that subscribe button. I can't thank you guys enough. Let's get into the video. Of course, not a financial advisor, collecting all the data and dispatching it to you. Now, pop it up on here. Palantir Technologies closes at 41.92. Now, we've seen a little bit of a pullback. Palantir was sitting at these record highs at about the 45. And this consolidation above the 40s, I think, is an incredible accomplishment, especially for how fast Palantir has really accumulated in price action here in just the last year. And what we've seen with the inclusion in the S&P 500, all of the governmental contracts, all of the commercial contracts, things have been very bullish in terms of the headlines and what's been happening with the exponential growth for Palantir. Now, talking about today, we see a rebound in the market and some funky things that are going on. Let's talk about what we can expect for the earnings preview. Now, number one is that Palantir, we have to remember, is sitting at basically record highs that we have not seen since it IPO'd. Like, we're talking 3 years ago. In Palantir right now, the risk for downside potential has become a big cause of concern for a lot of investors, retail and institutional across the board. And that's just because it's sitting at all-time highs right now with a high valuation. And we've talked about Palantir has typically been disconnected from that valuation. It's always traded at a high. We've seen a lot of AI momentum and a lot of buying pressure coming into the stock. And there's going to be at some point where we see that valuation becoming more of a concern in a link that could cause Palantir to have a decent correction. And that could be very beneficial for people that are waiting to get in on the sidelines. Now, what Morningstar comes in and says, talking about an earnings preview here, they're giving you fair value estimates. And fair value estimates, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be much lower. We're going to see that across the board. No matter what, that's going to be much lower than what Palantir is currently trading at $19, and Morningstar gives it a 1-star rating, given the uncertainty rating very high. Now, usually I wouldn't care about a ton of these different types of articles, but however, Morningstar does draw a lot of eyeballs to different types of individual stocks, and they particularly talk about what to watch for in Q3 earnings here. Now, we've seen the previous few quarters have been incredibly successful, and this is what I'm going to get into in terms of my prediction. And similarly, they're expecting an uptick in customers as companies onboard Palantir. We've seen this continuation to the last quarter, that more customers are coming to Palantir due to their leverage and bringing utility, what they call ontology, into AI, actually making use of these large language models instead of just having them out there. Now, they're looking here at commercial clients in particular. They think that's the target audience. I would agree. And they're talking about here, Palantir is priced for perfection right now. With really what this means in terms of numbers, a lot of people are going to be looking at three big things. That's going to be the quarterly results. What's the actual results in reality? What's the true hard fact? What's the guidance for the upcoming quarter? What does Palantir expect for the next quarter in terms of their expectations and estimates? And also, what's the commentary going to be like in terms of the business pipeline? What things are they working on? What things are good? What things are they going to highlight in the earnings call, with specific factors such as remaining deal value adding further credence? Now, the fair value estimate, this is where Morningstar is not particularly keen with Palantir stock, and they talk about this here, the financial strength, risk and uncertainty, very high uncertainty rating just due to the fact that it is trading at a very high valuation, a very high price. Now, we know that Palantir is doing very well on the business side of things and that the financial strength is very strong. This is one of the reasons that I'm very bullish on Palantir, is you got $3.7 billion in cash right now. However, You talk about this here, another Seeking Alpha article talking about this. Palantir is positioned for a beat and a raise in its upcoming earnings. And what they expect here for quarter 3 24, right here for revenue, 720 million. Right now we see the estimate at 703 million, and they're predicting here earnings per share of 9 cents versus basically it's sitting at right where it's at right now. But in terms of that, with a high valuation, the addition of the S&P 500, the strong momentum behind Palantir, I think we're going to have a positive earnings. Now, the big concern is what is the reaction going to be? And we've seen this with stocks, even stocks that do release a positive earnings, is that we could see a little bit of a correction. And that, I think, is a decent possibility, especially what's been happening in the broader market. Now, the reason I say that is because we're starting to see the connection between valuation and the actual value of the stock starting to become more of a concern across the board. Even though that Palantir is doing very, very, very well, investors, and they might just be wanting the stock to come down in price, possibly even accumulate more shares. And that's something sometimes always happens with different stocks that do release their earnings. One thing that we do know is that Palantir is really getting involved with the future of artificial intelligence in terms of defense. We see a lot of geopolitical issues right now that are actually kind of benefiting Palantir because that's what they've been working in the defense sector for a long time, and especially incorporating artificial intelligence into it. So Palantir continuing to soar. You're seeing these articles coming out here, but has it peaked? Like I said, across the board, from a general perspective, what I'm seeing personally is a lot of people that I think are just wanting the price to come down a little bit and for possibly people to get in on entry points or the dollar cost average. One thing for Palantir, though, is we do see a reversal in the market. It'll be interesting to see what happens. One thing that kind of throws this whole prediction down into the garbage is that you have the election that's happening the day after. A lot of volatility is going to come with that. That will supersede, I think, any impacts on Palantir. So everything that I could be saying in this video could also just be all garbage depending on some of those big macro and even world variable economic factors. Now, Wall Street, and specifically what the stock market has been doing, was incredibly shocking to me today. We see the Dow Jones that clearly closes here nearly 300 points higher to begin November as investors are shaking off a weak jobs report. Now, Amazon helped bring up the general market here, coming up 6.2% as strength in the cloud and advertising business propelled the e-commerce giant. You also have Intel that popped, even though they severely missed their earnings expectations. They increased their forecast in their revenue and offering strong guidance, and that allowed them to pop, which was really interesting. And you see here that the jobs report released Friday show that the economy added just 12,000 jobs. That's it. 12,000 jobs in the month of October, below the Dow Jones estimate of 100,000. They only came in at 12% compared 0.12, the ratio to 1. That's what they were expecting, 100,000 jobs, only 12,000. This is the weakest level of jobs creation since December of 2020. The unemployment rate held at 4.1%. And they talk about this. This is because of the hurricanes and the Boeing strike. What? You're telling me it came in the worst, the weakest level of jobs creation since December of 2020, and the market shrugs us off? There's really no reaction to it, which I think that's interesting that they just kind of got shoved under the radar. They show that the labor market decelerated quite significantly in October compared to September. And really, they say here is due to labor strikes, it's unlikely that this weakness is going to be causing the Federal Reserve to pivot away from the 25 basis point cut. Why this is also important is because you have the election, well, you have the Palantir earnings report, you have the election, and then you get the Fed that's going to be meeting November 6th and 7th. They're going to be releasing what their basically kind of what their decision is for interest rates. Right now, the market's pricing in 99% odds of a quarter point rate cut at the Fed meeting next week, which is also a lot on the table. So what do you think about all that mumble jumble we just talked about? Palantir beating their earnings, but still possibly having a reduction in price action. Do you see that as a probability? Because I definitely do right now, just with what the market sentiment is showing, perspective, and what I'm seeing across on top of the big media headlines. I know it's important, obviously not to look at that, but I'm more anticipating how are the investors, how's the general public, how is the institutional, how's Wall Street going to react to all those different types of articles and what they see. Some people are much more emotional than others in terms of trading. And what do you think about the jobs report? 12,000 versus 100,000, and we just kind of shrug it off, waiting for another rate cut. Interesting stuff out there. Peace out, take care, and I'll catch you guys later.